Women, what is your I am the client, not my husband. Stop ignoring me. So a while back, my wife and I were hitting up local dealerships trying to find a replacement car for her 2006 Nissan subcompact. The first thing I would tell each salesman was that we were shopping around for a daily for her to drive. Honda dealership was stereotypical car salesman. We can't even let her take a test drive unless she shows intent to buy. The Ford dealership ignored her completely and tried to sell me a Mustang. Toyota was like, oh, you must want to look at our insert soccer mom vehicle here. But when we got to Mazda, I told the sales guy the same thing, that we were looking for her next car, and he immediately nodded, turned to her and asked, what do you look for in a car? And then he just listened to her. He didn't ask me anything for the rest of the time we were there, focused entirely on her and answering her questions. Never rushed her or pushed her towards a different model. So yeah, we'll probably be getting her a Soul Red Mazda 3 because of that guy. Finally, a salesman who gets it. A true gentleman who respects women's choices. Story 2. My husband and I were buying a new mattress. It was a joint decision and the feel of it, but my decision for the price point or warranty, etc. Because I was paying for it. In other words, all the stuff we actually needed a salesperson for. Salesperson was a fine guy, old-fashioned, not overtly rude, but he was definitely talking to my husband more than to me, the one with the money to pay. I noticed, but I'm used to it. I was going to get my info and pay the man. Whatever. My husband, bless him, wandered away all floaty, like he'd never seen a furniture store before. Weird, but okay. Then he came back and said, hey, can I have some money? I'm going to go check out the insert dumb little decorative thing in the other part of the store. I was weirded out because I've never seen him care about a lamp enough to go examine it on his own, and also we don't do that. But yeah, I said sure and handed him some cash. The salesman immediately stopped paying attention to my husband. Suddenly in his mind, I was wearing all the pants. He started asking me what I did for a living, etc. And I was able to negotiate for a slightly lower price. I loved my husband so much. He knew exactly what he was doing. Aw, this is adorable. Her husband sounds like a fun dude. Story 3. My husband and I had our backyard completely dug up and re-landscaped when we bought our house. The landscaper was an older guy, probably around my dad's age, and my husband and I are pretty young to be homeowners, so I could kinda understand this dude's condescending attitude. When he came over the first time to do the estimate, he almost exclusively addressed my husband, even though he had made it clear I was the one who was doing the designing and knew what I wanted done. When the work was done and I paid him, he kept looking behind me for my husband and almost didn't give me the aftercare instructions for the new sod, saying he wanted to make sure it was done right so he'd email them to my husband. I finally snapped. Give me the damn piece of paper, Bruce. I'm the one who will be home during the day to do the damn thing. I worked nights at the time. He reluctantly handed it over and called my husband the next day to make sure the lawn got watered. My husband told him, you'd have to ask her, Bruce. She told you should do the damn thing. And hung up. I had indeed done the damn thing. Should have told him to sod off. Story 4. We were buying a car for me, paying for the whole thing outright, but financing the minimum amount because they ran a deal that got us $1,500 off if we financed through them. We paid the whole note the next month. So of course we had to sit in the salesman's office for an inordinately long amount of time answering questions. The salesman, who was great in every other way because he was a hands-off, no-pressure guy. We walked from several other places when they attempted to pressure us. We'd ask my husband the questions. My husband pointed at me and said, I don't know, it's her car. Salesman said, of course, but we all know how it goes, right? And kept asking him. So what ended up happening, because we both wanted to get the paperwork signed and get the hell out of there with the car, but we were also on the same wavelength wondering about how far we could go with this, was that the salesman would ask my husband the question. Husband would blatantly turn to me and repeat the question. I would answer him, then he would turn back to the salesman and repeat exactly what I'd said. Dude never got the idea that maybe he could just ask me the questions. On the car we bought for my husband a few years later, since we put both of our names in the paperwork we both had to sign, the finance guy saw my last name was different and asked when we were getting married. I was confused when we said, 8 years ago? Story 5. Not exactly the same, but still not awesome. When we were having our house built, the lady helping us kept saying that the house would have Wi-Fi on all 3 floors. But we asked and paid extra to have Ethernet cables run to certain rooms. She laughed and said, well, he can have one to run to his office, but you'll be fine with Wi-Fi. And I was like, no, I would like one as well. We both play games online. Sometimes MMOs and wanted hard lines run, and she just couldn't understand why a woman would need anything other than Wi-Fi. It just made me angry for her to make the assumptions. My husband is awesome and regularly tells contractors to speak to me about things. My dad was a machinist. My mom worked for a tool company. I built bathrooms, put shingles on, repaired popcorn ceilings, built stairs, repaired dishwashers, sinks, washing machines, etc. Even things like spackle. He's like, maybe you should do this. You're better at it. He handles the car, I handle the house, divide and conquer. It's so frustrating when people assume I don't know anything about repairs or tools. Back in high school, I took AutoCAD. I'm just glad my husband is very supportive and knows and thinks I'm capable of doing things. Story 6. I was looking for a new car and my boyfriend at the time came with me. Not because he was going to help negotiate or anything, just came so I wasn't alone. I saw a pre-owned year-old vehicle with low mileage and it still came with all the manufacturer's warranties still. The entire time, the salesman kept trying to make the pitch to my boyfriend. Even though I was very clear from the get-go that I was the one purchasing the vehicle, it was mine and he had no say. The guy continues to pitch it to my boyfriend. I decided I liked it enough, wanted to buy it, and was willing to put that aside. Now at the time, the current model year of these vehicles were like $2,000 to $3,000 more, so there definitely needed to be a price reduction. The dealer kept on focusing on payments, which wasn't my concern, the overall prices. I had pre-approval from my bank, so I knew the max I'd feel comfortable spending, my interest rate, and what my approximate payments would be. I told him I didn't want my credit run as I already had a pre-approval for an auto loan through the bank until we nailed out pricing. The guy would not stop focusing on this payment amount, and finally I asked him if he was willing to negotiate price or not. He then, in a condescending voice, asks me what this magical little formula I'm using to figure out my payment is, because it's obviously not correct. I commented that he obviously isn't willing to help me, so I just go somewhere else. He at this point quit talking to me, turned to my boyfriend at the time and said, "Can you please tell her how buying a car works?" I got up, yelled at him, said I'd never buy a car from him, that dealership or that brand ever, and that maybe he needs to have a little more respect for women. The manager called me shortly after, but at the time I'd gone to another car dealer that sold a different make of car across the street and bought my car. Story 7. Not exactly this scenario, but it rankles me to this day. There was a particular car I wanted, and I wanted it with a manual transmission, which was tough to find in that car. There was one at a local dealer that was near my office, so I stopped in during my lunch hour to see what they do on price. At the time, I was a young, professional woman in my 20s. The car was for me, and I was paying cash. I wander in around noon on a Tuesday. No one even acknowledges my presence, though there was no one else in the showroom. Finally, I go up to one of the salespeople and say, "Hey, do you still have model car? I thought you had one in stock." The guy looked at me in total seriousness and said in a very condescending tone, "Oh, honey, you don't want that car. It has a manual transmission. Let me show you these others that would be better for you." What? After the initial shock wore off, I looked at him and said, "Well, first off, my name isn't Honey. I have a name which you'd know if you'd bothered to ask. Second, I know what I want and don't need you to tell me. I think we're done here." And with that, I walked out the door. I ended up finding the same model, manual transmission, at another dealership about an hour from my house. Totally worth the drive. I did most of the deal over the phone. The salesman did not care that I was female. We got to a price we could both live with and the deal was done. So much better. Drove that car until it went out about 10 years later. The first dealership went out of business about a year later. Can't say I'm surprised. Story 8. I was the guy in this scenario, but I was at a Comic-Con with my girlfriend. It was her idea to go to the con as she actively collected comics. I have a pile of graphic novels, but usually don't bother with individual issues. At one booth, there was an indie artist trying to hawk his new book. He saw us both looking through a copy and came over to engage. He started talking to me, but then she asked him a question about the book. He gave her a short answer and then tried to talk to me about the book again. She just got an annoyed look for a second and then moved on to the next booth. I set the book down and cut him off to say, "Sorry, dude. She's the comic fan. I was just looking at the drawings." And then moved on too. Assuming I was the nerdier one was acceptable. Still a somewhat assumption, but if you look at the traditional gender split of a Comic-Con, it's a reasonable assumption. But once she tried to engage and he ignored her in favor of a male, then that just showed he was an idiot. And seeing it firsthand, I really kind of felt bad for nerdy girls who have guys gatekeeping nerdy things or assuming the girls don't have the right to be interested in them. Story 9. I don't have a husband, but my dad used to take me shopping for big purchases, like a car or my first computer. And I have to say, this didn't happen very often. The only time I got this was when I was shopping alone for fishing lures at Sporting Goods. Now, I don't condemn the store as a whole. I've shopped there many times, and this is the only time someone was a schmuck. The clerk, older guy, saw me shopping, came over and assumed I was shopping for someone else, and kept using he pronouns for this assumed person. I've been fishing since I was old enough to hold a pole. With my country cousins, we'd dig our own bait and make our own poles. I dove for clams for supper for my family when I was 13 years old. Yet this dude kept probing. Who are you buying for? What kind of fishing does he do? I stayed polite because my mom always said, end them with kindness, and let the idiot help me because I really did have questions about what kind of lure is best for catching trout down the bayou. Then I told the manager how uncomfortable this employee made me, and the manager immediately believed me and said he'd speak to the employee after I left the store. I have faith that the manager did. I mean, I was going to let it go, but I was waiting in line to check out and the manager was right there, and I thought, this clerk is probably doing this for every woman in the fishing department, so I felt obligated to stick up for all of us. Story 10. I'm building a schoolie and occasionally hire friends to help out for the day when they're in need of work. Every single time I go to the hardware store with these friends, all the hired hands have been men so far. The workers address them instead of me when I'm obviously the one actually looking at the products. One such worker continued to address my friend, even though I was answering all the questions he asked. After 3 attempts to get this misogynistic old man to acknowledge me in the conversation, my friend started laughing and walked away. I continued to stand there, cheerfully answering the questions he barked at my friend, who was actively walking away. I was so entertained at this point. This was war. When my friend left the aisle, it was like a flip switch in the worker's head. When he was speaking to my friend, he was asking about floor plans and fridges and all the little things that make it a home. But the moment he started talking to me, he started absolutely questioning my engine, the capacity of my battery bank, and all the things I'm sure he assumed I wouldn't be familiar with. I answered all the questions with ease and even had the chance to mansplain my electrical system, as the worker said something blatantly wrong while speaking with me. The moment he realized I was explaining something to him, he turned beet red, insisted he knew what I was talking about and that I was wrong, and cited his uncle's business as reason to believe he knew what he was talking about. I smiled, suggested he attend some local community college courses to refresh his memory, and wished him a nice day before walking away. It was a beautiful moment. The worker avoided me every time I went to that hardware store for months, until I stopped seeing him altogether. Story 11. I was at a Mexican restaurant with my husband. I don't eat cheese or dairy, so I was looking for items in the menu that didn't list those as ingredients, and I found shrimp tacos. The other tacos on the menu did list cheese and white sauce as ingredients, but I thought it made sense for shrimp tacos not to have those ingredients, so I didn't bother telling the waiter no dairy. I mean, the menu didn't say they had dairy in the first place, so I thought I was in the clear. The tacos came out smothered in cheese and white sauce, so I sent them back and told the busser, a different person than the guy who took our order, that I was sorry, but I couldn't eat dairy. The waiter came storming out and asked my husband why she, me, sitting right there across the table, obviously capable of speaking, sent the tacos back. I told him that I couldn't eat dairy and that the menu didn't say they had dairy on them. He ignored me and told my husband that she should have expected there to be cheese in all of the tacos. So I asked why it didn't say that on the menu. He continued to ignore me and told my husband that she had no right to send food back because she wasn't paying the bill and he would only talk to the one who was. My husband told him that he needed to talk to me, the one with a problem, so he stormed off to get the owner and called me a witch on his way off. That was the only thing he said to me. He got up and left without paying the second he walked away. This was not an allergy situation. I just don't like cheese. I'm not in the habit of telling servers every food I don't like when I order food. Story 12. Not my story, but my wife's. For clarity, I'm autistic, and I do not do well with interactions at all, especially if I don't know the person. We had to get our septic tank pumped, and when the guy was over, my wife and I both came outside to talk to him. I was mostly following her because my dad's name was on the request, and we have similar names. I assumed he would ask for a name, so I went out. The septic guy kept telling me things about the tank, where we lived, our toilet habits. The tenant before us flushed a ton of protection, which I don't use. My wife explained to him that they weren't ours, that we just moved in, etc. I listened to him, but didn't respond a word, just nods and gestures. Still, he kept talking to me about how to maintain the tank, and I'm not technical. I have no clue what he's saying. My wife kept answering because she had more experience than me at the topic. Eventually, she stepped between him and me and fielded his comments a lot more firmly. It was weird. She was friendly and understood what he was talking about. I was withdrawn and distracted. I guess he was as bad at picking up on social cues as me. Story 13. My previous partner, who does Let's Play on YouTube and streams, and I went into a fairly popular game store in British Columbia. She was there to pick up some games and equipment, probably $300 to $400 worth. The sales associate came up to us and just started talking to me, asking me what I needed and completely ignored her. I said we were there for her, and he talked to her like she didn't know anything. Before she could even say what she was there for, he was like, "Oh, you on Animal Crossing or something?" Yeah. We left and went to the other shop in town, and they got her business. Pro tip, when approaching a couple or group, ask, "How can I help you both or all today?" Don't focus on one customer. My current partner had this happen when we went to a comic book store together in Ottawa. She isn't super familiar with comics, but wanted to buy some art books and maybe a figure with some comics, but had some questions. Anyway, this French-Canadian dude walked up to us and rudely was asking me if he could help me find anything. So I know the shop and my way around. Been there a few times and I had my comics in my hands. I told him, "No, I'm fine, but my partner could use a hand." So she's trying to explain what she's looking for in English, and it's not her first language, so it was hard. I didn't acknowledge anything she was saying. I mean, I understood. I'm looking for books with artwork in it. Not the comic, but a hard book. Anyway, she switched to French to try and explain to him, and apparently he just said, "I don't have time for this," in French, and walked behind the counter to look at their cards. So again, we left and never went back. Do places just not understand customer service and how much money these employees are making the owner miss out? Don't know if you've seen the price of figures in art books, but they aren't cheap. Story 14. I'm not married, so when I make large decisions about my house that I own and paid for, I ask my father to come along as an advisor. I'm not young, so the female plus age equals stupidity assumption shouldn't be there. Last year, I was replacing all the windows. The house was built in 1935, and I made appointments with 3 different companies: national, local, hardware store chain. The guy from the national company only focused on my father, who repeatedly told him, "She's buying the windows. She's done the research," which was true. When we sat down at the dining room table to crunch the numbers, the guy would only let my dad see the laptop screen. Finally, my dad said, "Can I see that? I don't have my glasses." The guy gave him the laptop and my dad handed it to me. The second local company sent a woman rep, and there was absolutely no problem at all once I told her it was my house. The third sent out another man, but he was younger than the first guy, and me. So once I told him my house, my money, he also focused on me. Classic case of mansplaining gone wrong. At least her dad had her back. Story 15. Not me, but my mom handling a situation about me. I was a problem child from birth. My mom had to have several meetings with the school principals about me. One time in Head Start, I got kicked off the school bus, and Mom had to attend a meeting for me to be able to ride the bus again. The school neglected to inform her of this until the bus failed to pick me up. Mom, already angry that she had to take me to school, was not happy at all about the rest of the situation. When she arrived, the male principal was halfway sitting on his desk. Mom started asking questions about why she wasn't informed of my suspension. The principal gave her incomplete answers about how that wasn't his job. When Mom pressed the issue, the principal, stupidly, suggested that she call her husband to come deal with this matter. Mom lost her mind. Now, my father, as much as I loved him, wasn't the greatest. He was flaky with a drinking problem that Mom was practically raising alongside my sister and me. He was unreliable and irresponsible. Mom always had been the one to handle everything with my sister and me. So when the principal suggested she bring a man in to handle issues with her children, Mom was less than impressed. She went off. She crossed the room rather quickly, informing the principal that she was the only person with whom he ever needed to speak about her children. She's the husband, the wife, the caretaker, the breadwinner, and whatever else he needed to justify speaking with a mother about her children. By the time Mom was done ripping that man, he was cowering behind his desk. She has this special skill when she gets mad. Anyone remember when Gandalf went off on Bilbo in Bilbo's house, and Gandalf gets impossibly large and intimidating, and everything kind of goes dark except for him, and it's kind of scary? Yeah, my mom can do that, and it's terrifying. I remember standing by the door listening and thinking, oh no, he's in trouble now. Story 16. A little more than a decade ago, I, male, was at a party with a few friends and a whole bunch of strangers. I got into a conversation with another guy about our work. He was a programmer and I was a physicist, and at some point we started talking about quantum computing. He asked me a whole bunch of questions to which I gave answers, but my subfield was not quantum information. Fortunately, my friend came to the party with me, and she was also a physicist, and specifically a quantum computing specialist. As soon as I saw her across my field of vision, I waved her over, thinking she'd both appreciate the conversation and be able to contribute a whole lot more than I could. Y'all, even after I introduced her as a fellow physicist and quantum computing expert, the guy kept asking me questions, and I kept being like, I honestly have no clue, friend. You're the expert. What's going on there? And I deflected 3 or 4 questions that way before I think he got the hint that maybe he's addressing the wrong person. He changes his conversation strategy so that instead of asking me about QIS, he starts trying to show off to her. but he knows about it. Like in his brain, this flipped from an opportunity to learn more about quantum computers to an opportunity to get laid, showing off what little he knows about the subject. So he's mansplained flirting quantum information science to a woman who had literally built and programmed what was, at the time, one of the world's only functioning multi-qubit quantum computers. I wish I could say I watched her cringe a little inside, but apparently this was such a common occurrence that she was injured by it, and just laughed and went to get another beer. Story 17. Back when I was married, I was the financial manager in a marriage. Not that I particularly wanted that role all by myself. I would have preferred to be a team, but I was on my way to learning that my husband would simply not engage in subjects that made him feel uncomfortable, since he wouldn't deal with looking at cash flow or budgets, thinking about housing costs, retirement, or college savings. Even when I tried to make it a joint effort, I handled it all myself. And every time I initiated a move, like refinancing our house or opening an investment account, his name would be listed first and mine second. It mattered that I was the one who exclusively worked with a broker or whatever. I thought it was BS. He thought it was funny. Fast forward to the first tax year after our divorce. We divided our assets but retained one joint investment account specifically to fund college for our kids. We had not addressed the issue of paying taxes in this account in our divorce decree. When tax time came around, I was at my tax accountant's office with all my financial paperwork, including this account. She said, "You could pay the taxes in this account and ask him for half, or you could leave it up to him. The IRS only gets the social security number of the first person in the account, so he's the one on the hook for taxes." I said, "I won't be paying them then." He was furious. Too bad, so sad. Story 18. My stupid boyfriend at the time left the lights on in my car for a whole weekend, so he was super out. I bought a new battery and changed it out, but there was a mechanism that prevented the car from being turned on after the battery had been changed. '06 Civic. Still don't know why that was a thing. Anyhow, I was still locked out of my car, so I called the locksmith. I asked my boyfriend to go to the parking lot of our apartment with me because he was a stranger and I wanted to be safe. I explained I changed the battery but still couldn't start my car. First of all, the locksmith wouldn't look at me or ask me any questions even though I called it in and was giving him all of my info. It was my car. My boyfriend at the time was dumb as a box of rocks and could only tell him my car was blue and had 4 doors. I explained again that I changed the battery and I couldn't understand why it wouldn't work. He starts messing with my key fob and I say, "No, the battery in my car, not the key." He drops what he's doing and says, "Oh no, you shouldn't have done that. Why would you touch that? You should have told me you touched your battery." Why the hell shouldn't I touch my own car battery? Maybe he would have understood if he listened to me the first 6 times I told him I changed the battery. Long story short, he did nothing and charged me $100, even though it was my boyfriend's fault and he still didn't pay me back. So I had to have it towed to a mechanic who fixed the problem in 5 minutes. Story 19. I have an opposite one. I only cared about certain things at my wedding: the ceremony, the photographer, and my dress. The reception, venue, menu, music, etc. was all up to my husband. I get overwhelmed by too many options, and I also am very easily pleased. I was also devoted to the ceremony and knew I would be completely content no matter what happened after that. He had a vision and ideas for what he wanted, a whole concept and feel. A man can have dream weddings too. It was so difficult to get vendors to speak to him and direct questions to him, and to call him with questions. They'd explain to the staff many times the amount of times he would be dismissed with, "Well, brides prefer," or "Let's ask the bride." We ditched one florist who did not get it. She suggested I didn't care about the wedding. No, I do. I just like what he chose and he gets to have a special day too. His mother was judgmental about it, but she was about almost everything. He could really tell the people who would do a good job by how quickly they could adjust to speaking to him and showing him options instead of me. But as an everyday thing, he's a burly man. I am not. If he drinks, it'll be something like an amaretto sour or a grasshopper, his favorite. Me, I like dirty gin martinis, old fashions, a nice smoky scotch, or hefeweizen. We're always served the wrong drinks and have to swap. Story 20. Which one? There are so many. I even call it dumb broad syndrome. Okay, first off, I'm a bit of a smart guy, so I'm buying a hunting weapon. After standing around waiting my turn, the counter guy helps everyone ahead of me and a couple after. Then he heads for the back. I called out to him, "Excuse me, can I get some help?" He turned and said, "I'm sorry, I thought you were with that man." I immediately flared up. "All 5? Do I look like a street worker?" Another time I was in a motorcycle dealership getting parts. After everyone else has helped, I'm still standing waiting, being ignored. Finally, I had enough and went over to the other counter they were huddled behind. "Excuse me, if I dance on a counter, will I get help?" Red-faced, they retrieved my parts. Last one, my daughter and I were shopping for her first car. We went to Hertz car sales and were looking around, invisible. I even walked up to one salesman who told me he was busy. Busy? Doing what? Watching the wind blow? Anyway, husband shows up and they all head for him. I took his arm, kissed him, and said, "Let's go to XYZ dealership. The service here is terrible." He just left them standing there. He tossed over his shoulder, "Sorry, boys. Should have helped her. She buys all our cars." Story 21. I'm a hairstylist, and it's not uncommon for women to let their male partner dictate how they get their hair done. The worst experience I ever had with that was a few years ago. This older couple came in, my first time meeting them. The woman sat in my chair and her husband was hovering over me instead of waiting in the lobby. As I was trying to consult with her, her husband was answering for her the entire time and telling me how to cut her hair. Well, she sat there, quiet as a mouse. If she did open her mouth to speak, he would cut her off. I was so uncomfortable because I didn't know if I should even be asking her the questions or just to look at her husband. Finally, I couldn't bite my tongue any longer, and I looked at the lady and said, "Okay, well, how would you like your hair cut?" I think her husband instantly took the hint because he said not another word and went to sit down. While cutting her hair, she mentioned that she'd been wanting to grow it out a little because she likes it longer, but her husband wouldn't be happy with that. I said, "Well, it is your hair, you know." And she just smiled and looked away. He must have liked it because after examining it thoroughly, he tipped me well, but I felt so bad for that woman. So many women, men too, with hair that isn't practical for their lifestyle or isn't what they want because they let their partner have too much control over their appearance. I think that's lame. Story 22. Gonna get buried, but oh well. About 2 years ago, I locked my keys in my car while I was getting gas. Stupid, I know. I called a locksmith and then my boyfriend to let him know that I would be home late. They didn't want me to be there alone since it was 9 or 10 p.m. at this point, so he came to wait with me. The locksmith called me to ask which car was mine, and I told him. Keep in mind, I'm obviously a girl. High voice, typical feminine name, etc. There's no way he didn't know it was my car. He got there after 3 hours and proceeded to tell my boyfriend about what he was going to do to my car, then asked him if he had any questions. He, of course, said it wasn't his car and that he'd have to ask me. The locksmith turned to me and pretty much started saying the exact same thing again, only with way more explanation than necessary. I eventually had to cut him off and tell him that I heard the first explanation, that I understood and to go ahead. He proceeded to keep doing the same thing, only talking and addressing my boyfriend about what he was doing to my car. He only addressed me when it was time to pay. Story 23. Computer stores. Every freaking time. If I'm with my partner or my dad, they talk to him 100% of the time. If I'm alone, it's worse because they don't want to talk to me at all. The big box stores just make up some BS so you'll hopefully go away and stop asking questions. Asked for a gaming monitor with a very fast refresh rate. Dude tries to sell me a TV. Asked someone to point me to the compressed air because I wasn't sure where in the store they were keeping it. A patronizing guy tells me there's no such thing. Asked if they had any internal DVD drives in stock. A similarly patronizing guy, different guy, just equally patronizing, tells me they don't exist either. Small stores are slightly better at answering the question, but no less patronizing and assuming you don't want what you said you want. Asked what mid-range GPUs were in stock because the one in my computer just exploded, and I needed one right there and then. A bored sales guy told me about the absolute cheapest trash cards NVIDIA makes without even looking up from his phone. Asked about the specs in a laptop that was on offer. Guy reads off the little label that was on it. "Yes, I can read. Thank you. I saw that. It has the price and the size of the hard drive, but I would like some pesky details like the CPU and the GPU and the RAM." The whole thing makes me mad and I shop online exclusively now, because I can just order parts and have them show up at my house without coming down with a serious case of feminist rage. Story 24. I used to own a 2012 VW Beetle that had the most annoying rattle in the sunroof. I came home from college during Christmas break, dropped it off at the dealership to take care of the rattle, then picked it back up when I was on my way back to the U. My fiancé at the time was behind me in his car with our dog when, all of a sudden, my roof panel flew off my car and nearly went through his windshield behind me. I was so scared and furious, I walked into the dealership demanding answers. He says the glue they used was old, blah blah blah. Not good, so they redo it and I'm to pick it up in 2 days. All is well so far. I come back to my car absolutely covered in glue remnants, small dents, looks like a rush job all around. I'm not about to leave in my car like this, so I pull the service manager for a chat. I point out all of these things and he denies, says his guys wouldn't do that. Are you calling me a liar? All while addressing my fiancé, not me. At one point, I literally step in front of my fiancé so that this guy's looking me in the eye and I say, "Do you think he drives a Beetle? This is my car and you will address me only from this point forward. This glue in my car is unacceptable. And if you think that I did this," points to dents, "then yes, I am calling you a liar." Then I use the tactics of uncomfortable silence combined with prolonged eye contact. He paused for a moment and said, We can take care of this for you, ma'am. 23 years old and the first time I really stood my ground against a schmuck. Felt incredible. Story 25. This is me, constantly. I'm a mechanical engineer and my husband is technically savvy, but I have a more studied technical approach. The worst is at home improvement stores. So many times I've had people tell me completely wrong information confidently and try to sell me something completely different. And God forbid I ask a question that makes them confirm a tiny part of a larger understanding I have. So often they like to steamroll any understanding I have and explain to me that things are entirely different than I have understood. Stuff like pipe threading being different from machine threading when I'm asking if they have pipe thread taps, or diamond tile bits existing when I ask where they are. I also get a lot of crap at car dealerships or mechanic shops, etc. Mostly with them trying to sell me new air filters and stuff. But folks, it's super important to charge your transmission fluid. That isn't a gimmick, and neither is oil changes. Oil or transmission changes are a great deal, usually at mechanic shops. The real rip-offs are replacements, like air filters and components that are in the middle of your engine. Fuses, filters, knobs, batteries, and even brake pads and alternators are all fairly simple fixes. Story 26. I'm the husband. My late wife can't tell the stories herself. She was the IT manager at a large community service organization, basically a conglomeration of charities and various government aid programs. They had bid out a job to design and install a complete networking solution for the first time, so everyone could stop passing floppy disks back and forth. She wrote the specs and the job was granted to a big local company. At the time, I was still a student and doing some temp work with a community service organization on the side. I stopped by her office one afternoon just as the on-site lead was informally going over the plans and notes with her and one of her male subordinates. The lead was asking for guidance, which was good, and my wife had written the plans, so he was in the right place. However, he was directing his questions to her subordinate and wouldn't even make eye contact with her. When my wife gave the answer, he kept asking her subordinate to confirm. Even worse, once I entered the room and they continued the conversation, he directed questions to me as well. I didn't work in her area and only had a rough idea of what they were doing. She finally broke it down for him. He, pointing at her subordinate, works for me. He, pointing at me, is my husband. I am the one in charge. After the installation was complete and the initial warranty was up, they contracted an ongoing maintenance agreement, but with a different company, in part because there were continued communication issues like that. A second story, almost but not quite matching the I am the client theme. I got threatened by the IRS for not filling taxes for 4 years in a row while I was a student and working part-time. I called the service number to follow up because my wife had prepared her taxes for us every year we were married and was very thorough. After a brief conversation, I got them to look up her tax returns, where they immediately found I was included as her spouse. Their response was, "The man's name is always supposed to come first. That's why I chose you didn't file." The form at the time listed the signatures as your signature and spouse's signature, with no gendering. Story 27. I'm a seasoned interior designer, and my partner and I are doing a small remodel in one room of the new house. The builder knows my profession, and he and I sat down together, alone in all of our preliminary meetings, and went over all of the scale plans that I personally drew up. So on the first day of construction, both my partner and I were on site to answer the inevitable questions that come up in the initial phase, and every time the builder asked a question, it would go directly to my partner. My partner would kind of shrug and look at me, and I would answer. Even for technical details, when I had all of the notes and paperwork in my hands, it was assumed that my partner had the answers. At first, it didn't bother me, but after a while, it felt weird and like I was invisible. I was uncomfortable in my own space. I'm used to dealing with it at a job site at work, but was kind of surprised to experience it in my own project at home. I eventually snapped a bit and stated to him how all tech questions are my field and need to be addressed to me. And the builder adjusted. I'm a non-confrontational person, and I wished I didn't need to fight for my place in those conversations. At work, it is a bit different, because I know it will happen, so I'm ready for it. I run crews of painters, drywall installers, flooring installers, etc. when doing design work. I had a male assistant for a few years, and even though I would talk to and hire the contractors under my company, which is in my name, and I would communicate all the details of the job to contractors, when we were on site, they would always ask my assistant questions or shake his hand and address him first in most situations. My assistant was kind of a dry, sarcastic schmuck, so he would say things like, "This isn't my business. Why don't you speak to the actual boss?" I would stand there and enjoy the discomfort. Then they would turn to me and things would resume. It bums me out that this is a normal part of the day. Story 28. This is my mom's story, not mine. Most often retold by my father. Story goes that a decade before I was born, the two of them went to purchase a car. My mom had done tons of research, knew the car, the price, the specs, everything. My dad was along to help where he was needed. They find the car they want, spend a while talking to the sales guy, kick the wheels, and head back to the guy's office to finalize the deal. Now my family is full of stubborn people. My mom is no exception. From minute one, she couldn't stand that the sales guy directed his responses to my father, hated that he kept switching to discussing price in terms of the monthly payment rather than total price, and thought that discussing price by sliding a piece of paper back and forth was about the most idiotic thing she'd ever experienced. The way my dad tells it, this went on for 2 hours. The sales guy and my mom fighting and my dad just munching on metaphorical popcorn until the guy accidentally refers to the price in terms of the monthly payment for the first time in half an hour. My mom just says, "Screw this," and leaves. Zero warning or hesitation. The sales guy, almost in tears, turns to my dad and asks him to control my mom. Dad replies, "You've been talking to her for 2 hours. What the hell do you think I can do?" And chases after my mom. Apparently my mom ended up getting the prize she was after. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.